Artificial intelligence is gradually turning one industry after another upside down. And perhaps you have also wondered, when will tax consulting be affected? When will tax consultants actually become redundant? Admittedly, the initial hype surrounding ChatGPT and similar tools has somewhat flattened out. However, there are more and more professional and increasingly good solutions that can actually help you with your tax questions. And in this video, I thought I would give you an overview of where we currently stand with the topic of artificial intelligence in tax consulting. We are now starting with ChatGPT, so to speak. I want to make it very clear that using ChatGPT for tax questions is somewhat like Googling. So you can also find answers to your tax questions on Google, but the likelihood that the answer is correct is about 50-50 perhaps. If you can recognize and identify good sources, then the likelihood is probably more like 80-90%. But to be honest, you don't have really good certainty there. But let's try it out anyway with the question, I am a software developer, am I a freelancer or a business owner? Many of you software developers have probably already asked yourselves this question. And of course we get an answer. ChatGPT says that whether you are classified as a freelancer or a business owner as a software entrepreneur depends on the nature of the activity. Correct so far. In principle, German tax law distinguishes between freelance and commercial activities. This distinction has significant tax consequences, and that is also true. Then it states when it could be a freelance activity and when it could be a commercial one. And it also gives a few examples. I don't want to go through the entire answer word for word at this point because we want to look at several tools, but such a question is often answered quite solidly. And here, at least at first glance, the question seems to have been answered quite well. Especially the last piece of advice, clarify status with tax office for a final classification. Yes, usually a simple phone call is not enough, but you could, for example, request a binding ruling. It would be nice if that were mentioned here, but the answer does not seem inherently wrong. The problem is I have no sources here. So if I rely on this now, then I am in doubt because I have no justifications. And even if I ask ChatGPT for justifications, for paragraphs, for any references, for judgments and so on, I simply get nothing. It's good for initial review, but whether it's really correct, I'm unsure. If ChatGPT will give me the same answer in a dispute with the tax office in 3, 4 or 5 years, I'm also unsure. Therefore, ChatGPT should be treated with caution. A small note on the topic of ChatGPT. The latest model, the OpenAI o1 model, is much better suited for tax questions. Even there, you get no guarantee. We can do the same. Just ask again, but the o1 model is good at conclusions. What does that mean for tax questions? ChatGPT first looks at which legal provisions, that is, which characteristics are actually relevant to provide an answer. Then, ChatGPT looks at the situation you have described. The situation is not extensive as it states that I am a software developer. But if you provide more context, then ChatGPT first looks at which characteristics from your situation are actually relevant to give you an answer. And then there is a comparison between which traits are necessary, which you have described in your situation, and then there is a reconciliation, and only then does it provide the answer. Or simply, ChatGPT first thinks about it, meaning it looks at the topic first, then examines what the traits are, in this case for freelance work, and only then starts to respond. And as a result, the quality of the content response, especially for tax questions and generally legal questions with the o1 model, significantly better than with all previous models. But the problem remains, you have nothing in hand when using ChatGPT for future reference. And that's why ChatGPT is not really helpful for tax questions. To better understand things and issues, it is quite practical, but not really as a consultant. But there are other solutions for that. The Answers tool from Otto Schmidt and TechCIO addresses a major problem that ChatGPT has, because ChatGPT not only has the problem that you have not provided any sources and therefore have nothing in hand, but quite honestly, the training data, meaning the information that OpenAI uses to generate its responses, is simply garbage, to put it bluntly, because ChatGPT was trained on the internet. That means what people have indeed written on the internet is included in the response from ChatGPT. And the problem is, there is significantly more nonsense on the internet about tax matters than there are correct things. And it's not just that there are factually incorrect things on the internet, but also very often outdated information. If I wrote an article 10 years ago about the small business regulation, it might have been correct. However, it doesn't help me answer today's question because the law has changed a bit since then. And that is a problem that OpenAI cannot easily solve with ChatGPT. But there is a solution approach from specialized publishers. These are the so-called RAC models. This means that the answers are not based on built on ominous, intangible training knowledge for us, but based on a specialized database, such as that from Otto Schmidt. And here we simply enter the same question. I am a software developer. Am I a freelancer or a business owner? I still want to know the answer. Now I get an answer, similar to ChatGPT. However, I actually receive sources here. And when I look down here, I can indeed see sources. That means Hessian Tax Office ruling from 2023 with reference, then there is a specialized book, and then there is a definition somehow, also from another book, Freelance Activity. Then there is also in the Income Tax Act ABC, a commentary on the Income Tax Act, and the Hamburg Tax Office said something in this area in 2015. That means I get sources here that I can actually refer to when contacting the tax office. This means that if I know where these things that are stated here also are located elsewhere that I can refer to in communication with authorities or honestly with a tax advisor is worth its weight in gold. Ultimately, I have to honestly say that a tax advisor does nothing different. You go to the tax advisor knows it or looks it up somewhere and finds these sources, reads these sources, and then gives you an answer based on that. So, this is how advice takes place. Let's take a look at what is actually stated in the content. The qualification of your activity as a software developer is based on various factors. The development of system and application software can be classified as freelance work under paragraph 18, paragraph 1, number 1 of the Income Tax Act if it is engineering-like. According to the rulings of the Federal Fiscal Court, BFH, a taxpayer who develops system and application software can practice an engineering-like profession without a formal degree as an engineer. What is crucial? The activity requires an engineering-like approach, planning, construction, monitoring, and is qualified. And if I need sources for that, I can look them up. And the nice thing is that I can just click on it and actually land directly at the right place in the Otto Schmidt database. This means that Otto Schmidt is actually somewhat like ChatGPT for tax-related questions. Otto Schmidt, together with Taxi.io, was one of the first to bring such a tool to the market for tax consultants. They have also continuously developed it further, and to be honest, the quality of the answers from this approach is often very, very good. So, on average, the answer from this approach is better than what a tax consultant would spontaneously answer from the gut. Because this approach searches the entire database of Otto Schmidt to answer. However, there are areas and individual questions where this approach has its weaknesses. These are 3 areas. First, questions about very current topics. For example, the Annual Tax Act 2024, when only the draft exists, can often lead to the newest legal changes not being available in the Otto Schmidt database yet. And then, this approach cannot provide an answer to that. This is not only the case with news, such as legal updates, but also when answering questions requires information that is not in the Otto Schmidt database. For example, labor law, social security law, international tax law, or tax law in general from other countries. This information is simply not available in the Otto Schmidt database, and then this approach cannot really answer these questions well. And honestly, for very complex questions, this approach is also out. It cannot really help. In very complex questions, one would have to work step by step. This means breaking down the facts into subproblems, solving these subproblems, and then eventually putting everything back together, and so on. Ultimately, the reasoning ability is lacking in answers. What ChatGPT can already do with the latest model, Answers cannot yet do. That is why Answers is not ideal for complex tax matters and for matters where the case law may change, and it is not easy to use. There is still a big but. If you're thinking, hey, awesome, this is basically a tax advisor flat rate, I'll buy it, you can go ahead. I pay 240 euros per month for the Otto Schmidt database and another 100 euros for ARNS. So ultimately, I pay 340 euros per month to use it this way. And to be honest, with that budget, you can also hire a tax advisor, and the tax advisor is usually more competent as they answer complex questions knowing your situation. In the end, you must determine what questions you have from your life. ask those questions here, and a tax advisor avoids those problems. And a tax advisor is in the end cheaper than this tool. But I wanted to show you what is technically possible. And there are now also simply cheaper solutions, and in my opinion, also better solutions in many sub-disciplines and questions. For example, CoPilot Tags from Haufe, and we will take a look at that as well. The structure looks like that of all the other tools. Design-wise, there is no unique selling point, but maybe in terms of content. And we are asking our well-known question here, I am a software developer, am I a freelancer or a business owner? And since Haufe CoPilot Tags is also a rack model and therefore works very, very similarly to the model from Ansatz, the database is now being searched. In this case, not from Otto Schmidt, but from Haufe, and based on that, an answer is generated. I will also receive sources shortly, and I can already see that it is quoted accurately here. That means I find here exact legal paragraphs. But CoPilot Tags has two decisive advantages compared to Ansatz. Firstly, it is simply cheaper. The CoPilot Tags do not cost anything extra. This means that if you have access to the Haufe database, you have this CoPilot Tags, and access to the Haufe databases starts at around 1,000 euros per year. That means about 80 euros per month for having an AI chatbot that answers your questions. And at 1,000 euros, some of you might say, well, that's worth the money to me. The second advantage is the content of the database, because at Otto Schmidt, the focus is very much limited to tax law. This is sometimes very, very practical for professional work, but for someone who just wants an answer from, if you want to have varied perspectives, this is more of a disadvantage as I only see the tax perspective. And the Haufe database is simply more comprehensive. It also contains knowledge about controlling, human resources, finance, and so on. This means that the answers I get from the CoPilot Tax in Haufe are simply more comprehensive. And that's why, and this is my personal opinion, I find the answers in CoPilot Tax from Haufe better than those from Otto Schmidt and Answers. But we will examine the answer ourselves. As a software developer, whether they are classified as freelancers or business owners. Question arises, freelance activities are defined by paragraph 18, paragraph 1, number 1 of the Income Tax Act. This also includes engineering-like professions. We see that the argument follows the same path. Comparability with the engineer would lead to the conclusion that a software developer would be a freelancer. However, the jurisprudence has clarified that a software developer without a formal degree in engineering typically does not practice an engineering-like profession and is therefore subject to trade tax, meaning they are a business owner. Such a case was decided by the Munich tax office, where a software developer without a university degree was classified as a business owner because he could not prove that his knowledge and skills corresponded to those of an engineer. This question cannot be answered very clearly, which is why. I find it quite good in that context to test this as well. This means one must argue that they are qualified enough to work like an engineer. The easiest way is to prove this with a degree. It can also be done another way. Now we come to the difference to ChatGPT. I cannot rely on this answer when I have a dispute with the tax office. However, what I can rely on is this. That means if I find something here, like this, software developers without a degree do not practice an engineering-like profession. Judgment commentary. That means it is a commentary on a ruling. That is likely not what I wanted to know right now, but it is at least probably what the tax office would say. And here is actually a comment on a ruling. I could also take a look at the ruling now. And this ruling or this comment is also accessible to the tax office. That means through these sources, here, for example, IT consultants, freelancers, or traders, and you can rely on this comment if you should ever have a dispute with the tax office on this topic. And that's why these specialized AI solutions are honestly already a great relief. Unfortunately, they still cost relatively a lot right now, but I see the future there. Let's come to a conclusion. Will tax advisors be unnecessary in the future? Will AI take over the job of tax advisors? And I must say, in some areas, probably yes. In other areas, especially where complex questions arise and where opinions change, it becomes difficult. I will show you an overview by Professor Dr. Rainer Brutigam. You will find a link to it in the video description below. Take a look. In the study, he concluded that AI can answer simple tax matters well. Generally, you can rely on that. in more complex topics or where the case law is not so clear, AI still lags behind. AI will certainly improve, but ultimately we must not forget that what AI advises you must also be implemented later. And at the latest, that's when the tax advisor comes back into play. And that's why I don't believe the profession of tax advisor will disappear, but AI will take over parts of the work of tax advisors in the coming years. And to be honest, that's good. It's good for clients, it's good for the tax advisors who are all overwhelmed and overworked, can't find employees. Therefore, in my opinion, these are good news and a good development, and I hope that AI makes progress and becomes cheaper. If you use AI to answer your tax questions, please be extra careful whether indeed what is stated there, because with answers and also with CoPilot tags, I see again and again that in the answers, sometimes things are stated that are actually different in the source documents they refer to. This means please always click on the sources and read whether it really says that there, and be cautious about things that have just changed or are currently changing. I have also asked the tools about regulations regarding the deductibility of the home office, and so on. And there have been so many changes in recent years that unfortunately leads to the answers being mixed with old legal status and new legal status and so on, which ultimately has led to the answers being incorrect. And there are indeed constantly new legal updates. The e-invoicing obligation, home office flat rate, the taxation of electric cars, the business identification number, and so on. There are simply many changes right now. Therefore, always ensure that your answer is based on the latest legal status. You can add to your prompt with Legal Status 2024 or Legal Status 2025. That already improves things, but also remain skeptical with specialized AIs and check whether what the AI is telling you is actually stated in the source. And ChatGPT helps you understand things better. This means if you actually want to answer tax questions with ChatGPT, you should ideally look up the sources beforehand. Go to the website of a tax advisor or Haufe or any other trustworthy site. Download the text there and then simply have them summarized by ChatGPT, such as, this is the way you can actually have your tax questions answered by ChatGPT and through ChatGPT. If you have any questions or opinions about whether you wish tax advisors to disappear or to stay, whatever it may be, let me know in the comments. And if you need a tax advisor now, a real one, flesh and blood and so on, you will find a link below in the video description that helps you find a tax advisor. You will also find a whole range of recommendations for tax programs, accounting software, accounting programs, and so on. Check it out or click here. Save thousands of euros for a specialized AI by watching my videos. For example, this one or this one.